This is Mark Pavlyukovskyy, and welcome to the TechMates podcast, where my partner Hendrik and I explore how Kiwi and Aussie founders are reshaping the future and what sets them apart. Hendrik and I have been part of successful companies in Silicon Valley and Europe, and now bring that expertise to partner with entrepreneurs in Australasia. By sharing the personal stories of successful Kiwi and Aussie founders and how they got here, we hope to inspire you to dream big. This is TechMates, bringing an outsider's perspective to the stories of those daring to disrupt down under. Let's dive in.
You guys have questions that you'd like to ask, if you just scan that code, they're going to pop up here on this computer, and we'll kind of select some that are interesting and ask live. So please scan the code, ask questions.
Yeah, great. So I don't know if anyone has listened to TechMates, our podcast, before.
What's that?
Okay, there's a few more that we need. But basically the way it works at TechMates is that I'm preparing very diligently and I'm trying to stick to a script and ask a lot of questions. And then Mark just kind of goes very, very deep and totally interrupts my schedule. So this is how we're going to run this panel as well. And luckily we actually had Shaun and Janine on the podcast, so they know the format, which is great. But maybe to kick things off, do you quickly want to, the three of you introduce yourself, maybe starting with Janine?
Hello, thanks. Push to go. Awesome. Kia ora, everyone. Lovely to be here. So Janine Grainger, I founded a company called Easy Crypto, which NZVC invested in. And earlier this year, we exited to an Australian business, SwiftX. I now work with Ministry of Awesome, doing startup mentoring, and also sit on boards of a few other companies while I bide my time and come up with my next great idea.
That sounds interesting.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Shaun Quincey. Sort of been around the ecosystem. I think I raised my first bit of capital in about 2013 or 14, involved in about 18 different startups, CEO and founder of Simfuni. Investor in a few different funds. I love the VC ecosystem and what it's done and doing for New Zealand. At the big eventual, hopefully a lot of you are on and we're all on and Janine's been on and it's good fun.
And I want to mention Shaun, actually, his dad was the first to row across the Tasman unassisted. And then Shaun actually, I think, did that. It was the second person in the world to do that.
18 kilos ago as well, by the way. The downside to having a startup.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Jacques Richter. I've got a background in engineering, but I was lucky enough to find my way into venture capital and development finance. I work for New Zealand Growth Capital Partners. We've got two funds that we administer. This via seed fund, which I head up. That is a direct seed fund. It goes into companies at the pre-series A stages. The Elevate fund, which is a fund of funds program, they invest into VC funds, local VC funds in Southeast. I'm excited to be here. Thanks for the invite.
Thank you for coming. Great. So we got two founders and one investor here on stage. I want to ask, maybe starting with Janine, you've been through the entire life cycle, right? You started a company and exited it. Looking back, would you build again in New Zealand, and why or why not?
I think the first question is, would you build again, right? I know I joked that I would, but startup is hard. And I think, we all hear it's hard, but it is harder than you imagine it will be. And that's, so anyone in the audience who is doing a startup at the moment, hear Carhartt had an incredibly difficult journey. So props to you. Building in New Zealand, it's a tricky one. There are definitely some pros to building here. But every startup knows if you want any sort of scale, if you've raised funds, if you want to deliver returns, you have to go global. And going global from New Zealand is challenging. New Zealand makes a great incubator. It's a really easy place to do business. It's a great place to, everyone is 1, possibly 2 degrees of connection away from you. So anything you need, you can unlock through your network, which is really quite an incredible advantage. Our regulators are accessible. Other companies, people are willing to work with you, talk to you, help you out. But the world is a long way away and it is challenging to scale globally from New Zealand. Yes, probably because I'm lazy, I just stayed here, but we shouldn't underestimate how hard it is to grow from New Zealand.
And now maybe, most people who start crypto companies that have, a lot of them have lawsuits, they get kicked out of countries. The regulator actually worked with you here, and they actually build rules and regulations to support you based on your experience. So actually, you have probably the easiest time building a startup company probably in the world here. New Zealand.
Hard and easy. I was actually just on a panel yesterday at the Financial Markets Law Conference talking about this exact subject, which is that regulators in New Zealand have a very open door policy. In many other countries, it's regulation by enforcement. You don't know what the laws are until you get told that you've broken them and you have a lawsuit. New Zealand is so much more collaborative. You can sit down with the regulators, have a cup of coffee, talk about things. But New Zealand regulation is still not the most accepting or permissive of different types of innovation. It's just the deal with regulation anywhere, right? But we're not necessarily the fastest in embracing the change that is needed to encourage an innovation ecosystem.
I want to ask you from an investor perspective, when you look at companies like Janine's, for example, do you think about how big the market is for New Zealand, or do you think already on global scale?
Yeah, we find very few markets within New Zealand that are big enough to sustain venture outcomes. But to the point Janine's made around treating New Zealand as a bit of a sandbox to iterate the product market fit, it is an easy place to do business. It's a high trust environment and it's well connected. And I think the challenge there is understanding whether that will translate into the larger markets. But from an investor perspective, we very rarely see large enough local opportunities to build sort of venture scale companies. So that view of going global, understanding what that looks like, I think that's pretty important. I just want to acknowledge to Janine about the toughness of this. We're sitting on the comfortable side of the table. So whatever I say, just take it with a pinch of salt and maybe learn more from the founders themselves. Yeah, from an investor perspective, that's definitely the case. I think New Zealand provides that sort of high trust environment. If you've got a bit of hustle, you can probably get into any door in New Zealand. The challenging ones. And a couple of years ago, there was a startup genome report that sort of maps strengths and weaknesses of local ecosystems and benchmark that globally. And one of the areas that New Zealand obviously scores well is in that local connectedness, but the global connectedness is still a challenge.
I mean, I can report from, I've spent the last 10 years between Germany and the UK. Building a company in Germany takes, just setting up the company takes you 4 weeks. I think here it takes you a couple of hours to do it. And so that's already a big advantage. Shaun, you've also spent a lot of time overseas. I think particularly in Silicon Valley, is that right? Yeah. What are the pros and cons for New Zealand?
I think Janine nailed it. Access is amazing. You're only 2 or 3 people away from the CEO or a key decision maker. And I think when you look at the problems that CEO has with their organization, we work in enterprise and businesses, those problems are generally kind of similar to the problems people have overseas, but on a smaller scale. So you can solve some of those challenges and get access to what value creation looks like for some of those C-suite people, and they'll talk to you, and you might end up playing golf with them, or you might end up seeing them somewhere, and they'll give you their time, and they won't have security guards around them, and they won't be living in like somewhere that's totally inaccessible. So you get that access, which means you get the conversations, which you can understand where your value is, which is really nice. I guess the problem is that you could sell to the biggest of them, and then you're still kind of not big for a venture transaction to work, or to turn over to the multiple that they may want to see over a period of time. So I think you fall into the trap here of trying to sell to too many of them, rather than just proving your point and getting out as quickly as you can to prove it somewhere else. And so I think some of the challenges are more around ambition and confidence, and just having, I think a lot of us are ambitious, but then marrying that with, right, let's get on a plane and show up in Texas and do it again. It's tricky and hard and a lot of flights, and you throw kids and life into that and it gets harder again. So it's, it's all fun.
One thing that I've noticed, right, a lot of, for all the reasons that you guys both mentioned, it's really easy to build a $10 million company in New Zealand. And then it's comfortable, and you as a founder have a good life, and it sort of becomes a lifestyle business. And it's like you don't really have a lot of impetus to just go and go to Australia or the US, expand out. That's hard, right? You build something, people know you, you kind of become well known in the ecosystem. You have a good life, you have the 3 Ds, right? The badge.
Yeah, I think that's right, mate, because I think we're undercapitalized in many ways. We're only now raising $100 million funds around the place, right? And so for years, from like 2013 to 2017, you go raise your first seed round 50 on a 500 or something, right? You're like, fuck, how am I going to live off 50 grand? And you can't. So you die. And so you marry your ambition sometimes to what's actually real to pay for food or whatever it might be. And so I remember, I think with I'm paying my first business, I was paying myself maybe 20 grand a year or something, and had 2 kids and a really big mortgage. And so that's kind of life. And you can say, well, cool, that's your gig, suck it up. You're a founder. Or you can go, actually, you're not capitalized enough to win. And so I think it's now we're moving into this wicked ecosystem where there's slightly better alignment on the need and what's required to win, and to match VC outcomes with what operators need to put in. And we're developing more and more operators under larger funds. So it's a really exciting time, because the ingredients to bake the cakes is finally coming together, and the people have learned enough, and we've developed the personalities and the ecosystem and the maturity, the education, the learning, even Some funds are raising another fund, which is wicked and so good, but we're getting more experience in the ecosystem. So some funds are moving through and onto their fifth and sixth. So there's the experience there to marry with the experience of the startup founders and set realistic expectations, which is a wicked framework for what's to come, I think. Sorry, I got a bit passionate there. So
I'll go to the next Mark question.
Wow, it's me.
Let's see, Jill.
Yeah, no, I think one thing that obviously for an ecosystem like New Zealand or any ecosystem really is very important are these startup mafias, right? So companies that have been successful that then kind of churn out employees that are going to go and build their own thing, or exited founders like Janine who are going and helping other startups to build. And you've taken a few roles. I don't know if you want to talk about them.
So you didn't really start up mafia. That's make it kind of t-shirt.
Yeah, you could be a mafia. But I guess like where are we in this development in New Zealand? Are you kind of one of the first who were able to kind of transfer their knowledge to the next generation, or is there already quite a bit of that ecosystem of like exited founders and operators who are going to build the next thing?
Yeah, I didn't realize when I exited that I joined a club that was so small. Like I just assumed, that's what startups do. They exit. So many people have gone through it, but there are very few startups in New Zealand who actually have gone through an exit. And that's not to say there isn't a lot of successful startups. Some of them are still going, still generating revenue, still growing. An exit isn't the be all and end all. But we don't have a hugely mature ecosystem. We don't have a mature ecosystem in terms of some of the ways that startups and VCs work together as well. I mean, what Shaun was saying about, not having enough money to live off, there is still this expectation I see with founders that they can't take a salary, they can't pay themselves, they're expected to work for free, which, I don't know if you get it so much in the international ecosystems, that there's perhaps a bit more of a pragmatism. And maybe with New Zealand being such an egalitarian society, we sort of have this view of, hey, I'm not investing in your company for you to buy food for your kids. That's not what it's about. You've got equity, deal with it. But there is a few things like that. But this ecosystem is maturing a lot. We have a lot of really talented founders, both homegrown and immigrants that have come into New Zealand, who are giving their time, giving their expertise into the community. Again, with Ministry of Awesome, they've got this massive mentorship database, which is just fabulous. And I know, having been a portfolio company of NZVC, you guys were constantly bringing in talent, bringing in great people who have knowledge and expertise to invest into your founding companies. And you do see a lot of that, which is really encouraging.
Just on that, I think it's very important to start getting the exits and then recycling capital and talent. But the exits aren't necessary for that. So we've seen a lot of companies spin out of Rocket Lab and Avitana. They're now companies that set up either that expertise and sort of the early employees seeing what it took and learning those lessons. But I don't think the exits are necessarily greedy in a lot of one.
Yeah, I mean, I live in Sydney. There's a big Canva mafia, and Canva famously hasn't exited yet. So a few years going to happen next year. But Mark, one question for you, because you've just spent a lot of time in Silicon Valley as well. To Janine's point, like, do you think there's this expectation founders in Silicon Valley as well that they, don't get a salary and are super capital efficient? Is there more capital available in Silicon Valley?
Yeah, it's a great question, Nate. Right? I don't know. I think it really depends. I think there's so much capital you can generally probably base it on. Just to kind of live. There's also a lot of like infrastructure, like a hacker house. You will live with a friend. I mean, a lot of people who live with SF initially maybe live with a friend for a while, crash on a couch. It's funny. I had a friend who started Hinge Health, and he crashed on my couch while he was like kind of coming to SF for master meetings, and should have charged him for that in equity because we went public a month ago. Yeah, I didn't know. Yeah, a couple hundred million he's worth now, and it's crashing on my couch. Yeah, wish I could invest in that company. So there's definitely like a lot of that whole like people kind of get that. So if somebody calls you up, and it's so kind of normalized that like anyone can become a founder. Everyone's working an idea that even if it's like kind of the kid with like the untied shoelaces and the dirty shirt, like everyone's kind of like just valued on the merit of their ideas, not kind of how they look or where they come from or how they present. VCs overlook farm sector just on that basis. It's random college kid. So I think it's like there's still some of that needs to develop, and I think it starts with like founders and exit founders who here in New Zealand hopefully understand that, hey, you got to give somebody a break and help them break in.
Just want to quickly say the QR code is available if you guys want to ask any questions. I think Mark is supposed to monitor them, and if he does, but if there's any questions coming in, we're going to ask them here on stage as well. I just want to double click on one other point, and then, okay, so we're going to double click on one other point on culture specifically. I think there's definitely, like when I moved to this market, and I'm from Europe, right? So I'm not even from the US, but I really had the feeling that founders are kind of underselling themselves quite a bit. So, it's kind of, I had a feeling they didn't really want to say how ambitious they were. And I learned later that there's actually a term for it, top CEO. You've been around, like all three of you have been around for a while now in the market. Do you see that changing a little bit with more kind of outside influence coming in and with markets being, like VC markets being more international?
Oh, I'd like to think it is, but then I'm trying to check myself a little bit to go, maybe I'm just way better at ignoring it as well. I'm not too sure, because I think it's whenever someone, New Zealanders and Australians, actually, we're really good at chopping each other down. Generally, we can be quite funny when we do it sometimes as well, which makes it hard, but it's a horrible habit, and it's quite easy to do it. Whereas, I like to try and, from a personal perspective, make sure I'm the person who's going, that's fantastic, go for it every single time. And playing around in the VC world as both a founder and an investor over the last few years, I've typically been that person to go, yeah, let's try that. That's amazing. And I think you learn that because you're wrong so much as well. So you kind of get enough uppercuts that you realize you don't know everything. And that's the wonderfully humbling thing about being in this space, is you're constantly wrong. And it's, you learn how to say congratulations to the people you said no to quite regularly, which is a really cool thing, I think. So I think New Zealand's getting better at it. And it's because we have amazing, amazing companies being created from people with crazy ideas. And then it works.
Have you had people
Definitely. I think when we went out there, and I'm sure Janine has had the same thing, and we said we're going to rebuild the operating platform for the insurance industry, everyone's like, bullshit. Like, so you go through, and I can't remember, and Rob from Sharesies says the game quite really well, and I can't remember it, so I'm not going to be able to pull it off, but it's, first they laugh at you, then they fight you. I can't remember what it is. It's a really good quote. Look it up. And it's kind of that, right? You've got to take people on the journey, and as a founder, you can visualize your journey. You've got to learn and teach people, it's kind of VCs as well as other investors and stuff, where your mind's already been on that particular journey. And that's part of when I talk about we're getting mature as an ecosystem of founders to tell that story, to convince the capital and come on the journey with us. We're getting better at that. So Tall Poppy is being sort of slowly leveled out by capability, I suppose, and proof points, which is really awesome. And we are in a mature market. And so it's an exciting time, but as you see more and more of these unicorns come to life, which they really are, which is so cool, it's going to be, we're going to go on this maturity curve of VC, and you can see universities now offering, startup degrees and stuff. It's a pretty cool time.
Janine, have you guys matter? It's been the worst example.
I don't know if this Tall Poppy or what the word for it is, but I did get a bit of flack from particularly my industry when I exited for selling out. Like, there's a sense of New Zealand is entitled to someone to provide a homegrown service in this area, and how dare you take it away from us by selling it to an Australian company? And I was just like, my blood, sweat, and tears for 8 years, and I think I'm allowed to exit. But it's an interesting one of sort of there's this, we do hold quite tightly this idea of New Zealand grow and build, staying in New Zealand, which can make exits difficult for founders because you're unlikely to get bought by a New Zealand company. So you either need to keep growing and be that Kiwi unicorn that stays the behemoth globally, or you face a bit of flack for that pushback. To Hendrik's question, about we have enough of an ambitious mindset. I almost wonder if we have this, what I see with the startups that I work with is this kind of, people don't necessarily question that mindset. It's kind of like a given. If you're going for VC funding, you have to have aspirations to be a $1 billion company. And I think it's something that we do need to consider more, that people who are starting businesses, once you get past the point of, hey, this is a lifestyle business, there's a huge range of sizes that you can go for. You could be a $1 billion company. You could be a $200 million company. There's all these sorts of different levels. And I think it's a challenge for startup founders to actually think about what is right for me. I know when I got to around 150 staff, I realized I hadn't ever thought about how big I wanted my business to be. Do I want to manage 1,000 staff, 10,000? Would I prefer to be at 100? And is that kind of what is the right scale and size for your aspirations, for who you are, for when do you step out as a leader? All of these questions that I think we don't have enough nuance around. It's sort of the the VC growth mindset, no offense, is, grow, get big, get that $1 billion valuation. And that's maybe something we need to challenge and put a bit more.
I mean, if we challenge Jacques as a VC, like, how do you think about it? Because you're probably looking for these really big outcomes and mindset for.
Yeah, I think from our perspective, we're trying to build a pipeline for Series A demand for the VC funds to invest in those, and they apply a particular lens. I think as that ecosystem matures and you get different funds at different fund sizes, because the fund size is really the sort of the metric that you solve for when you look for exits. And I think as the market matures and we've got a range of funds and, maybe some emerging managers coming through, there'd be more opportunity for funding for sort of to load them at, I guess, outcomes. There's a whole bunch of things that play into that calculation, like capital efficiency, which we've talked about. A lot of Kiwi founders are really capital efficient and they think it tolerates sort of low outcomes from a VC perspective. But I think just as the ecosystem matures and more players enter, and there's a range of diversified types of capital, you see more companies being able to raise off sort of lower TAMs.
Jacques, I'm curious, how do you guys invest in companies? How do you select companies? Like 8 years ago, Janine comes to you and says, "Hey, I used to work at this bank. People keep asking me to buy Bitcoin." And I think I'm like, putting my job and actually starting a company to sell Bitcoin with other crypto people. Would you invest in her?
That's what proxy investors, I think, through New York.
Yeah, so our early funds would have NZVC Portfolio is British portfolio. We can't say that we, like Shaun says, you make many mistakes and hopefully you learn from them and you carry on. So our sort of investment thesis, I guess, is evolving all the time. And but it's very much at that early stage. It's founder focused. Is it somebody that you think could build a team and can solve the problem they're trying to solve? And then the problem needs to be meaningful, right? It's no use. Your life's ambition being a problem that's not going to be that meaningful. You got to have ambition around what you're trying to do, like a founder. And I just want to maybe go back to your question around Poppy. I think the way we've experienced that is, I think a lot of people is off the mindset that it's a zero-sum game, and I think that's probably what needs to change. It's not a zero-sum game. Let's say it's a positive-sum game, and one success actually begets more success. And the fact that there's a successful founder in the ecosystem actually increases the likelihood of the next founder to be successful. And the same with investors. And I think if we can, as an ecosystem, sort of try and shift our mindset, that our mindset from being, zero sum and competing for things as opposed to collaborative, I think that'll go a long way.
That's a very, very broad terms, right? And like as a founder, I've been a founder. It's like you always hear VCs saying it has to be a meaningful problem and you have to be passionate about it. Like, what is that actually? Like, what do you, how do you actually make decisions? If there's founders in the room sitting there and asking, will you fund my startup? What are some real tangible metrics they can think about?
Yeah, look, I guess I'm the only investor on this panel, so it's fair to pick on me a little bit.
You can always flip it back to the moderators.
I was going to say, he's genuinely asking.
Asking for a friend.
You're trying to build your own fund pieces. Yeah, unfortunately, it doesn't boil down to specific metrics, right? It is highly qualitative as opposed to quantitative, especially at the very early stages. And that's why we get it wrong so often. But yeah, as I say, if you've got those broad strokes in place, have a good story to tell, a narrative that, you can sort of not only get investors on board, but your customers as well, and your team, it goes a long way.
I want to get to questions as well, but maybe we do one more round. Do you have an eye on the questions? I guess looking out, so we're in 2025 now. We have a few funds around now that are going to raise the segment of the fourth fund. We have a few exited founders. We have some great companies that are doing really well. If you had like a wish for whoever it is, policymaker, founders, investors, what needs to change so that can build on what's already there? Maybe each of you.
All right, it's great fun. Actually, I think we do very, very well. I think in a number of areas, it's great. I think the AIP has been really interesting for our sector. I think venture capital needs to be successful for New Zealand to stop being reliant on dairy. I think that's critical. I think Tech Ashana can be that. We've got a few in the pipeline which can actually drag our country forward, which can be more patient about believing in this is the key. I think it's if we can educate our young people to believe in themselves enough to build startups, if we can get the capital to invest in those people, not on their first thesis, but just sounds weird, but just give them $1 million to try build a team and get some ideas off the ground and launch something. And it sounds really bizarre, but they'll learn so much and then get better and better and better at it. And then hopefully employ 500 more young people to build those businesses. So I think it's attitude towards that. I think when Jacques was talking then about investing, it's really interesting. If you've probably been asked the VC how many, when they're talking about why they're investing and so on, is that original investment thesis still true in that company? So like you gave them $2 million because they said they're going to do this, and then they pivoted to this, and then you gave them some more. So it's kind of like, it's always never the first idea. It's the investment in the team and their ability to pivot and their intelligence to identify a problem and solve it and pivot and move that creates the beautiful, big, massive company all the time. And so that's what's so critical. Regulatory space, I think, ESOP share options, things that need to shift and change in terms of incentivizing people through options and equity ownership. Naive market in terms of how valuable equity is to early stage employees, and taxing them on certain events can be really challenging for that mechanism to work effectively. Passion is driven through ownership. So that's something that could shift around. It's a big conversation. Awesome to hear the narrative about more money coming from the government into startups, because it is important. But yeah, I think we'll get on with it anyway without that money. I think I'm that kind of guy, so that's okay. But ultimately, that's probably, I just think we've just got to keep going. We've got to keep investing. All the good people bringing more investors into this market, keep them coming. And the more we can do to lower the barrier to entry to them coming, we should, because we need more of them. That's my view. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to be a little bit less positive and more contentious. We need to stop investing in people that look like Mark Zuckerberg. So this is part of the problem with the startup mafia, is that people invest in people who look like themselves. You have a few Silicon Valley startups that do really well, and they keep investing in the same mold of startup founder. Women founders receive 4% of all startup fund deals got a woman-led founder teams, and they receive smaller check sizes on average, so even less than that. So it's a real problem. We all know there's unconscious bias there, and we need to face into it and actually tackle it more intentionally and stop funding what the last generations looked like, and fix FIP tax too.
Yeah, we're actually hiring. So if you guys are interested in helping us select more diverse founders, please reach out.
Just write more checks. That's all you need to say.
Look, I think we have to acknowledge how far we've come as well. So since 2019, I think the enterprise value of VC funded startups have increased sixfold, which is twice the growth rate of comparable economies. It's still off a very low base, and we probably need to think about the next shift in what this ecosystem could look like, as opposed to incremental changes. We invest on per capita basis, about a third of what other countries do as an ecosystem. And I think we need a little bit of a mind shift there. We anywhere between 900 and 1,500 startups in the VC pathway, depending on what your definition is. That number probably needs to close at 5,000. So there's still a lot of growth in the ecosystem. And I think, we all need to play together to sort of align around that. If you look back, somebody or a country like Ireland, has got a similar population, used to have a similar economy in the 90s. We had comparable GDP per capita. They're not double what we are. And it's a focus on tech. We need to diversify our exports. This is the only sector that can deliver that. And so we need alignment. I think there's been some real good things. Migrant investor settings have created a lot of interest. I think we need to try and capitalize on not only the capital, but also the connection, the human capital. So there's a lot for us to do. But I think, we've proven that we can. We've proven that the ecosystem grows. It returns capital. So excited for the future.
There's a couple of audience questions that I like. One is, what is the starting point of an innovation-based business here? A local problem that can be solved, that can scale globally, a global problem to be solved, an idea from someone else that doesn't exist here. Is there a pattern / for a better success rate in one of these core components?
Well, I can give it a quick nudge. Look, I think everyone, founders and VCs alike, have different theses on how they pick what they're going to build and where their energy comes from to throw the motivation in it to build it. I think, I'll probably start with ChatGPT now, to be pretty honest about it. Digging into is this a thing, or what is this? I do that for almost 15 times a day now with everything else, including on how to talk to my kids. So I don't know why I wouldn't even do that. So that's where I would generally probably start. Now, for me, it's about research. It's about domain expertise, understanding particular industries and verticals, and where you think you may be able to apply your energy for the next 5 to 15 years and getting comfortable with that concept. And your curiosity in and around that problem, because your first thesis will be totally wrong. and probably your second, fourth, and ninth will be as well on your journey as you get there. And so I think it's general curiosity of that particular space, and you want to get into as the first spark to should you or shouldn't you jump to do it, and then your commitment and ability to sustain the journey, because that's kind of what falls apart is when you're saying to get all those different uppercuts, it's making sure that you can survive them and you're still kind of happy-ish surviving them. So it's not very complicated, but it's about as rough and tumble as it gets.
And we'll have different examples just after this panel. There will be a panel on the very local ideas that are very local to New Zealand, and then later we'll hear from people who have very global ideas. So we'll hear.
Yeah, I think just to reiterate what Shaun said, that passion and commitment is absolutely key. Like, the idea and the problem can come from anywhere: global problem, local problem, your own problem, your neighbor's problem, your dog's problem, friends doing great stuff and pets. But you've got to have the passion. It's got to be a problem that you're really committed to solving, and that you can keep getting up when you get knocked down, and you're not going to run out of that passionate energy for as long as it takes, which can be a long time.
Yeah, I don't have much there. I think, good ideas come from everywhere. And we've seen great companies like Alta being built in areas where we should have a competitive advantage. But we've also seen great companies, being built where we have no right to win. I don't think there's any formula.
Maybe one more?
Yeah. One of the conversation has a focus on capital. Can you address human capital, talent, and bring?
Good question. When I built my company, my co-founder and I were in different countries when we started. So we started as a completely remote business, and I think it was a huge advantage for us. This was before COVID. So leaning into COVID, it was, no challenge. Our staff were distributed all around the world. And I think we need to embrace that more. Like, we don't need to be locked into offices. You don't have to hire in Auckland if you're an Auckland-based business. And I think it's a great way to address brain drain. I think building a company that people want to work for is incredibly important. Like, that was one of my big things as a CEO was I didn't want my staff to turn up, wake up on a Monday morning and go, oh, do I have to go to work? Like, I wanted to be engaging and interesting. And after they were passionate about a job that challenged them, helped grow them, got them ready for their next career step. So I think being really intentional about how you treat your staff, being intentional about the workplace you create, I think this is a very surmountable challenge, because great workplaces attract great people. And as a founder, it's up to you how great your workplace is.
Yes, we need lots of good people. And so everything Janine just said, plus lower the barrier to entry to people to get here. So when talent wants to move here, I think it's just lower that barrier to entry, let them in. We need the smart people to help us. It is extraordinarily hard to recruit in New Zealand and so competitive, and we all try to remain friends as startup founders, but you just steal from each other sometimes, and that gets really hard.
Harder to fire
and all that kind of stuff. And so hiring is, it's all tricky. So I think the more the ecosystem builds, the talent pool is getting better and stronger and awesome. And I think what Janine said as well, I've run a startup pre-COVID and run one post-COVID, and the attitude has shifted dramatically. We should and can build with offshore teams, which is great, and because everyone's got way more used to it. So there is a bigger talent pool that is wider, and we've just got to keep nurturing that and keep attracting more people to our awesome little country.
I've got a question for the founders on this. I've heard anecdotally that the talent density in New Zealand is actually pretty good. Maybe the depth of that isn't there, but because of the connectivity, it's not that difficult to get good talent. Is that resonate at all?
Look, I think there's some amazing people everywhere. They really are. I think accessing them, because they're all quite busy too, and they can kind of pick and choose what they want to work on as well. So it's tricky to build the employee brand where people really do want to come in and own it, and that's competitive too. So I think they are there, but we need more of them all the time.
It does depend a bit where you are in the market cycle. Like, I've had times when it's really hard to hire, and other times when you get 800 applicants within half a day. But I think, you are competing against, particularly if you're enable remote workers, which, my company did, you're competing against Silicon Valley, against, global paychecks. But again, creating a really good culture. Like, I've had staff work for me when they could get 20-30% more working somewhere else, but they prefer to work with a culture that's really good, really supportive, where they have fun, where they enjoy their teammates. It ticks the boxes for values, which is important as well. I think, again, I just can't stress enough, building a great culture enables you to hire great talent. The other, going back to where we started this whole thing about the connectivity of New Zealand, you'll get a lot of referrals of people who want to come work for you because they have a friend who works for you, and that's a really great, cheap way to attract great talent and help you compete globally as well.
Great. So reach out to Janine if you want employees. Don't reach out to Shaun because he's hiring. Great. Thank you so much. This was a great panel. Give it up for the panel, please.
Thank you for tuning in to TechMates. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with friends. We'll be back soon with more stories of Kiwi and Aussie founders reshaping the future and disrupting down under. Until next time, keep dreaming big and daring to disrupt.